This week on PoorCenter, March goes a bit mad, a football coach tries to get himself canned, and Trey Turner literally saves America. All that and more next on PoorCenter. One man, every sport, every week. This is PoorCenter. Hello, everybody, and welcome to PoorCenter. I'm your host, Kyle the Addict, the only man on YouTube insane enough to cover every sport every week. And man, did I pick a hell of a time to start doing this show. It is the busiest week of the sports year. Literally every damn sport has stuff happening. We've got the NBA, the NHL, European football, Formula One, and even a little bit of off-season spice from the NFL. But all of that takes a distant backseat to the greatest single elimination tournament on earth. March Madness. No time to waste then. Let's get started with your weekly rundown. Right then, on to our top story. Every year, college basketball throws a crazy 3-week-long party that takes over the entire American sports landscape in a haze of upsets, desperation, and fuck-ups that can only come from a massive single-elimination bracket. The first 4 days gave us a headache-inducing 48 games, and I watched most of them so that you don't have to. And frankly, I feel terrible. And was it worth it? No, but I did it anyway because like most college kids, I have zero self-control. So for those of you who have lives, jobs, and don't have a bunch of free time to dedicate to a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old kids playing basketball, here are the best things I saw over the first 4 days of the tournament, presented in chronological order so that I might retain what's left of my sanity. The second game of the tournament produced a classic upset as 13-seed Furman knocked off the 4th-seeded Virginia Cavaliers. This game was everything fans love about this tournament in a nutshell. A very close back-and-forth contest that Virginia really should have won, but they lost because one of their most experienced players, a 5th-year senior named Kihei Clark, lost his mind and panicked at the worst possible time. With the ball, the lead, and a timeout, Clark got double-teamed, and instead of using that timeout, he simply chucked the ball as far down the court as he could into the waiting arms of Furman forward Garrett Heen. Heen passed it off to his teammate J.P. Peggs, who promptly knocked down the clutch tray to give Furman the lead with 2.2 seconds left. Oof, that is not the way anyone wants to end their college career. Luckily for Virginia, this upset wouldn't even be the most embarrassing upset of the day. That honor goes to the Arizona Wildcats. The 2-seed found themselves in a catfight against the 15-seed Princeton Tigers, and they ended up losing to a bunch of Ivy League nerds. Princeton wasn't even that good. Arizona just totally forgot how to shoot the ball in the second half of the game, scoring a grand total of 6 points in the final 11 minutes. Clearly, Arizona spent all of their emotional energy and/or talent beating UCLA in the conference final. Whoopsie. There were a couple other pretty good games this day as well. West Virginia versus Maryland was a pretty fun back-and-forth game to open up the tournament, and Tennessee was able to barely hold on to a lead to beat the Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns. Luckily, though, this was just the appetizer. The main course came on Friday. Friday produced some truly fantastic basketball with a couple of wire-to-wire slugfests in the form of the Florida Atlantic-Memphis game and Arizona State's hilarious choke job against TCU. The FAU-Memphis game was a battle between a 9-seed and an 8-seed, and it was every bit as even as those little numbers suggested should have been. This game had an amazing ending with 3 lead changes in the last minute, and Memphis, like Virginia the day before, dooming itself with a baffling turnover at the very end, leading to an easy last-second bucket for their opponents. Meanwhile, the 11th-seeded ASU Sun Devils ran up against the 6th-seeded TCU Horned Frogs, and they were able to get an 11-point lead before choking it all away. TCU's Jacoby Coles hit a runner at the very last second to give TCU the nervy win. And then we had another game that was a near upset, with the 14th seed Kennesaw State Owls nearly knocking off the 3-seeded Xavier Musketeers. The Owls were in control for the vast majority of the game, but that doesn't matter if you aren't ahead at the end. And Xavier were able to wake up and get their shit together and learn how to play defense again in the last 8 minutes, and were able to launch a storming comeback that was terrible news for the mental health of their fans and their alums. But the best thing to happen on Friday, and probably the whole weekend, was, of course, the single greatest upset in the history of this tournament. We saw the second ever March Madness win by a 16 seed, as the Fairleigh Dickinson Knights or Fair managed to knock off Big Ten champions and number 1 seed Purdue. This upset had some goddamn levels. For one, Fair were literally the shortest team in the entire field of 64, and they managed to knock off Purdue, who were the tallest team. Purdue has a 7'4" All-American center named Zach Edey. Fair didn't even have a single player taller than 6'6". Purdue has produced literally dozens of NBA players in its long history. Fair has produced exactly one NBA player, a guy you've never heard of named Bill Willoughby, who played in the 70s and frankly wasn't very good. Fair has, however, produced an NFL owner, Vikings owner Ziggy Wilf, as well as a handful of CEOs and politicians. You know, nerds. And yet, the Knights were somehow able to rise above the Boilermakers, due in no small part to Purdue's sudden inability to make wide-open shots. Purdue shot a terrible 19% from three-point land, way below their season average. Purdue also turned the ball over almost twice as often as Fair. Somehow, the Knights were even able to stop Zach Edey from getting the ball every possession without having to have two guys stand on each other's shoulders. Seriously, it is ridiculous that Purdue didn't win this game, and if they don't pull a Virginia and win it all next year, the Boilermakers are never going to live it down. Now, there's really no way Saturday could have lived up to Friday, but there were still some great games. 8th seed Arkansas managed to upset the defending champs Kansas in a narrow 1-point win. Kansas led almost the entire game, right up until the last 2 minutes, when their free throw shooting screwed them in 2 separate ways. First of all, they missed 7 free throws throughout the game, which hurts in a 1-point loss. But hilariously, it was a free throw they made that actually doomed them. Kansas forward Jalen Wilson went to the line down 2 points, needing to intentionally miss in order to create the offensive rebound opportunity for his team. But he fucked it up and he made the shot instead. No defending champion has made it to the Sweet 16 since 2016, which is awesome. College basketball is super duper weird. And in some Tiger-on-Tiger action, 15-seed Princeton continued their Cinderella run against 7-seed Missouri, winning by 15 points. Missouri pretty much gave up at the end there. Very unfortunate. And also, Texas and UCLA, both 2 seeds, nearly choked away their games. Texas was able to hold off a furious charge by 10-seed Penn State by simply giving the ball to their best player, Dylan Disu, who single-handedly dragged the Longhorns to victory. And the Bruins ran up a 10-point lead against 7-seed Northwestern, with the Wildcats eventually able to erase that lead, tying the game in the second half. After that, UCLA was able to steady their nerves, sacrifice a player, and gut out the 6-point victory. Luckily, David Singleton's ankle injury ended up not being as serious as it looked on TV, which is good, because the last thing UCLA needs is more injuries. And this brings us to yesterday, Sunday, which honestly was much calmer. We had a battle of 2 teams who have never made it to the second round in the form of Fair versus Florida Atlantic. This battle of the Cinderellas was pretty close until the Miami-based FAU Owls were able to pull out in front by 8 minutes in the last couple of minutes. FAU squandered their goodwill, however, when their guard Elijah Martin went for a highly disrespectful 360 dunk at the end of the game after Fair had already pretty much surrendered. Hilariously, though, Martin biffed it. That's exactly what you get. The wait to see a 16 seed in the Sweet 16 continues. Maybe someday. The Knights' elimination leaves Princeton, of all teams, as the lone remaining double-digit seed. Still, FDU will always have that crazy upset over Purdue. Amazing. In the other Sunday games, Kansas State's Wildcats knocked out the Kentucky Wildcats by 6. Michigan State upset Marquette, and Miami crushed Indiana. Overall, Sunday was a collection of mostly pretty lopsided games, but that's okay. We've still got a bunch more classic games coming down the pipeline for next weekend when the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8 tip off. Whew, that was a lot of college ball. Let's check in on the pro game, shall we? The NBA season has about a month left to go before the postseason, and this past week provided some fantastic drama as teams attempted to scratch and claw their way up the standings and into the playoffs. Obviously, there wasn't the same sense of urgency as you get from the single elimination nonsense of the college tournament, but we still had a handful of great games. So here's a quick top 3 to get you caught up. Mavs at Lakers. Dallas beat the Lakers on the road with an insanely clutch buzzer beater by Maxi Kleber. Kyrie Irving scored 38 points and also had the game-winning assist. Anthony Davis had a heroic double-double, and the Lakers played better than expected despite missing their best player and, arguably the best player of all time, LeBron James. We also had another crazy game in Chicago with the Kings visiting the Chicago Bulls. This game was another epic buzzer beater by a team on the road. The Kings' De'Aaron Fox silenced the Chicago crowd with a three with 0.7 seconds left on the clock. The Bulls led by 16 in the second quarter, but the Kings were able to erase that deficit entirely by the third. The Bulls tied the game on a 4-point play with 11.6 seconds left before Fox broke Chicago's hearts. And in Utah, the Celtics visited the Jazz, and Utah was able to keep their playoff hopes alive. By coming back from down 19 points, Boston was able to build up that lead by the second quarter, but the Jazz were able to pretty much eliminate that big lead by halftime. Boston could still have won the game at the very end, but Jazz center Walker Kessler turned up huge with a massive clutch block. So in terms of the standings, the Celtics dropped a place in the Eastern standings after their two agonizing ball punch defeats, both against the Jazz, and earlier this week they lost to a terrible tanking Rockets team. So Philly was able to jump up into the second seed in the East. The Sixers have won 8 games in a row as Joel Embiid continues to absolutely devour his opponents. The Heat, Hawks, Raptors, and Bulls continue to hold on to those last 4 playoff spots, with the Pacers and Wizards close behind in the race to see who gets to be crushed by one of the top 3 teams. And out west, the Nuggets continue to hold on to that top spot despite a rough couple of weeks, while the Grizzlies and Kings duke it out for the second seed. The battle for the 6th through 10th seeds is still incredibly intense, with 7 teams within 2 games of each other in the standings. So that should be an absolute melee as we barrel on through the last month of the season. All right, damn, that is enough basketball for one lifetime. So let's move on to the other winter sport, hockey. Right, so the NHL is pretty badly overshadowed at the moment, but here are the 3 spiciest games of the past week. We had an epic Canadian affair when Toronto visited Ottawa. The Leafs blew a 2-goal lead super late, with the Sens winger Brady Tkachuk sending the game to overtime with 11 seconds left on the clock. The Sens outshot the Leafs by over 20 shots on goal, but were unable to do anything in overtime and ended up losing in a 9-round shootout. Close, but no cigar. We also had a crazy game with the Tampa Bay Lightning visiting the New Jersey Devils. This was a gritty, back-and-forth brawl between 2 of the top teams in the conference, featuring a goal by each team in the last 5 minutes. Tampa's Steven Stamkos and Jersey's Timo Meier traded late goals before Tampa was able to gut out the win in a shootout. But the spiciest game of the week was when the Minnesota Wild went to St. Louis to play the Blues. Minnesota won in a 13-goal game, 8-5. But the real story here was Blues goalie Jordan Binnington going absolutely apeshit. He got himself ejected and a 2-game suspension. After Binnington gave up goal number 5, the scorer, Minnesota winger Ryan Hartman, accidentally brushed the goalie's leg on his way to celebrate with his teammates. Binnington took it personally and got himself into a fight with the entire state of Minnesota. Minnesota's goalie Marc-Andre Fleury was going to go fight Binnington, but was literally restrained by the ref. Ice hockey. Binnington, of course, received that 2-game suspension for being a very naughty boy and should be back, early this week. As far as the standings are concerned, there's very little movement at the top. In the East, the Hurricanes, Rangers, Devils, Bruins, Leafs, and Lightning maintain their iron grip on the top 6 playoff spots, while the Penguins and Islanders continue to hold on to the bottom 2 spots, with the Panthers nipping at their heels. Out west, the defending champion Avalanche appear to be clicking at the right time, with a 5-game winning streak to bring them into the top 6 in the West, along with the Stars, Wild, Golden Knights, Kings, and Oilers. The Seattle Kraken and the Winnipeg Jets hold the last 2 spots, but Seattle is very much a threat to break back into that top 6, where they have been most of the season. Calgary and Nashville are still in the hunt, but are running out of time to make up the multi-game gap. So we got about a month to go before the playoffs, and frankly, I can't wait, because playoff hockey is so dramatic and so much more violent than the regular season. Hockey players fight each other in the regular season because they feel obligated to do so, but when they fight in the postseason, it's out of genuine malice. Plus, regular season shootouts are kind of lame, so I'm never going to be upset to see playoff hockey with its sudden death overtime return. Bring on the playoffs. Alrighty, let's take a quick trip across the Atlantic and see what they're up to in the top football leagues. In Spain, we had El Clasico, the biggest rivalry in club football, as Real Madrid renewed hostilities with scandal-ridden Barcelona. Between their ref bribing scandal and their seemingly perilous financial situation, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Barcelona are having a crap season, but they actually aren't. Coming into this game, they were leading La Liga by 9 points, and coming out of it, they are now leading it by 12 after a dramatic winner by Frank Kessie gave Barca a 2-1 win in a wild match. Kessie's winner was set up by a very sexy back heel by Robert Lewandowski. Real thought they had a winner in the 82nd minute, but it ended up being chalked off by VAR due to being just barely offside. This was a fantastic match, and Barca now lead the league by a huge margin with only 12 games left. Barcelona technically could choke the league away, but it's hard for me to see how. Real Madrid will have to console themselves with being second in La Liga and probably winning the Champions League for the 8 millionth time. Speaking of the Champions League, in the middle of the week, aforementioned Real Madrid breezed through to the quarterfinals after beating Liverpool 6-2 on aggregate, while Manchester City's baby-faced Viking Erling Haaland scored 5 fucking goals against a totally outmatched Red Bull Leipzig side as City won 7-0. The Champions League quarterfinals start on April 11th and features 4 pretty tasty matchups. Inter Milan plays the Portuguese underdogs Benfica, Real Madrid plays Chelsea for the 3rd year in a row, AC Milan plays Napoli in an all-Italian battle, and the tastiest matchup, Manchester City plays against Bayern Munich. City's manager Pep Guardiola was the guy in charge at Bayern for 4 years before he took the City job. Not to mention, Haaland played in the Bundesliga for 3 years before joining City. So these guys will know exactly what they're up against. That should be a lot of fun. Meanwhile, in England, we had a mix between FA Cup and Premier League matches over the weekend. In the Cup, Haaland and City crushed Burnley 6-0. So, for those keeping score, City played 2 games across 2 competitions this week, and they scored 13 goals, with Haaland scoring 8 by himself. This guy is 22 years old. Simply ridiculous. In the league, Chelsea and Spurs could only manage draws as Arsenal thumped Crystal Palace to maintain their lead at the top of the table. But Spurs' draw was by far the more embarrassing, not necessarily because of how they lost, frankly, Tottenham were screwed over by the refs, but because of their manager's epic tirade at the end of the match. Antonio Conte, Spurs' boss since around the middle of last season, basically insulted everyone affiliated with Spurs, calling his players selfish and stating that Spurs management is used to failure. There have been rumors for months that Conte will be leaving at the end of the season. This rant makes it doubtful that he even lasts that long. Right. So that is about it for the footy this week. Let's check up on Formula One, which also had a race this week. Damn, like I said, there was a lot of stuff happening this week. Right, so during qualifying for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, championship leader and runaway favorite Max Verstappen managed to break his drive shaft and end up starting the race in 15th. He spent the last year pummeling the entire rest of the grid, so this mechanical failure had everyone asking, could we actually have a race for first on our hands? The answer? No, not at all. Verstappen's teammate Sergio Checo Perez won easily from pole as Verstappen sliced through the midfield to pick up second place. In fact, the most exciting bit of this race happened afterwards. The internet's favorite driver, Fernando Alonso, racing for Aston Martin, picked up a 3rd place, getting a consecutive podium for the first time in like 10 years. Except he didn't, because after the race, the FIA slapped him with a 10-second penalty for failing to serve an earlier penalty correctly. Except he did, because Aston Martin were able to successfully appeal that 10-second penalty hours after the race had ended. This was completely stupid and a waste of everyone's time and emotional energy, which is, pretty standard for the FIA. You gotta love it when the refs make it all about them, am I right? All right, in the World Baseball Classic, the U.S. national team almost got knocked out in the quarterfinals by Venezuela. The Americans were trailing 7-5 before Trey Turner did this.
The 0-2 to Turner, and he throws this one deep left field. Trey Turner!
Woohoo! Back-to-back World War champs, baby. Suck it, Chavez. Anyway, Trey Turner's grand slam would give the USA a 2-run lead that they would not relinquish. The next day, the US played a semifinal against another communist nation, Cuba, and it was much less dramatic as we were able to win by 12 runs. Woohoo! Team America will play in the final on Tuesday against either Japan or Mexico, who play later tonight or quite possibly around the same time that this video drops. Alright, last update for the week, the NFL. In NFL news, Aaron Rodgers went on the Pat McAfee show to tell the world he wants to play for the Jets and is simply waiting for the Jets and Packers to hammer out a trade package. Rodgers made it clear that he totally wasn't mad at the Packers before detailing all the ways in which the Packers have betrayed him over the last few years. He's definitely not mad, you guys. I promise. There were some other important stuff happening, players switching teams, but it's really hard for me to care right now, honestly. There'll be plenty of time to talk about the football offseason in the summer months, and frankly, if you care more about the NFL offseason than about March Madness, I genuinely feel sorry for you. And on that note, that is our show. God damn, that was a lot. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you all next Monday, assuming my obsession with sports doesn't literally kill me. Later!